There's a particular kind of failure that almost never gets talked about honestly. It isn't the dramatic collapse of a business or a public humiliation. It is quieter and slower. The project that never got finished, the skill that never got built, the version of you that never got to exist, not because of one catastrophic event, but because of thousands of small, repeated choices to retreat into comfort instead of stepping into effort. This is the territory of productivity killer addictions: procrastination, distraction, and comfort seeking. These aren't character flaws. They are sophisticated survival mechanisms, your brain doing what it evolved to do, minimizing discomfort and conserving energy in the short term, even when that quietly bankrupts your long-term life. This guide breaks down what's actually happening, why willpower alone fails, and what genuinely works to interrupt these patterns. What procrastination actually is. Asterisk. Most people treat procrastination as a time management problem. It isn't. It's an emotion regulation problem that happens to manifest as a delay in action. When you sit down to do something difficult, your brain processes not just the task but the feelings attached to it: anxiety about failing, boredom, fear of inadequacy, overwhelm. Procrastination is the act of escaping that feeling, not the task itself. Reaching for your phone instead of opening the document isn't a failure to manage time. It's a highly efficient way of regulating an uncomfortable emotional state. This is why better calendars and to-do lists so often fail. You can't solve an emotional avoidance problem with a purely logistical tool. The architecture of distraction. Distraction is the mechanism that makes avoidance frictionless and constant. Every major social platform and short-form video app has been engineered by teams of behavioral scientists specifically to capture and hold attention, using variable ratio reward schedules. The same mechanism that makes slot machines compelling, where you never know exactly when the next rewarding piece of content will appear. This is not an accidental side effect. It's the design goal, built to exploit the need for social validation, fear of missing out, and the dopaminergic pull of novelty. Understanding this matters because it removes the shame attached to distractibility. Struggling to resist your phone isn't evidence of weak willpower. It's evidence that you're a normal person interacting with a system built, with enormous resources, to defeat exactly that willpower. These systems are also disproportionately effective at hijacking attention, specifically during difficult, effortful moments, since a notification competes against something the brain is already motivated to escape. And the cumulative effect compounds. A daily pattern of constant small interruptions trains the brain toward fragmented, shallow attention, while the capacity for sustained focus, like an unused muscle, quietly atrophies. Comfort-seeking and the path of least resistance. Comfort-seeking is the deepest and most disguised of the three, because it often looks like rest, self-care, or being realistic about limits, and sometimes genuinely is. Humans are wired to move toward pleasure and away from pain and to conserve energy. This served us well in environments of real scarcity and danger, but in modern life this ancient wiring frequently misfires, treating a hard conversation or an ambitious project with the same threat response as a predator. The escape routes are the comfortable, low-effort behaviors all around us: the couch, the snack, the scroll. Its addictive pull comes from its perfect reliability. No matter how bad the day, comfort-seeking delivers a small hit of relief every single time, and the brain, especially under stress, is wired to prioritize that immediate relief over any future outcome, however important. Why these patterns function like real addictions. Clinically, addiction involves a behavior that provides reward or relief, is repeated despite negative consequences, becomes harder to resist through neurological adaptation, and often escalates over time. These three patterns meet all four criteria for many people, even without any substance involved. Each one engages the brain's dopamine system, particularly through unpredictability. You don't know what you'll find when you check, which is what makes the urge to check so persistent. Repeated activation in response to a specific cue, boredom, anxiety, the start of a hard task creates an increasingly automatic loop until the behavior becomes a reflex rather than a conscious choice. This is also why tolerance develops. The same 15 minutes of scrolling gradually stops producing the same relief it once did, driving a need for more time or more stimulation to achieve a comparable effect, a hallmark of genuine addictive escalation, not a personal failing. And unlike substance addiction, there's rarely a clean goal of total abstinence available, since phones and digital tools are now load-bearing infrastructure for daily life. The work is building a different relationship with something that has to remain present, not eliminating it. The real cost. The cost of these patterns is best understood through compounding math, not vague guilt. Someone who intends 2 focused hours a day but actually manages 30 minutes loses roughly 550 hours a year, nearly 14 full work weeks evaporated. Over 5 years, that gap exceeds 2,700 hours, well over a year of full-time work never invested, never compounding into the skill, the body of work, or the financial position consistent effort would have produced. Any single instance feels trivial, and in isolation it is, which is exactly the trap. The internal argument, this once won't matter, is technically true every single time it's used, which is precisely why a person can use it on every occasion across a year of drift without ever feeling the lie of it in the moment, while still ending up significantly behind. Beyond lost hours, there's an identity cost. Every broken intention casts a small vote in an ongoing referendum about who you believe yourself to be. Enough of these votes accumulate into a genuine felt identity as someone who doesn't follow through, which then becomes self-reinforcing, since each new instance of procrastination feels like confirmation rather than aberration. There's also an anxiety cost that's easy to miss. Avoidance doesn't eliminate a task. It just adds a layer of anxiety about being behind, which makes the task feel even more aversive next time, deepening the cycle. Much of the free-floating, sourceless anxiety many people carry is actually the accumulated residue of dozens of small, unprocessed avoidances that the mind never fully stops tracking. The psychology underneath. Fear of failure rarely announces itself directly. It shows up as "I work better under pressure," or "I need more research first." As long as work stays undone, it stays unjudged. This connects to self-handicapping, the largely unconscious habit of creating obstacles to your own performance, staying up late before an exam, prepping the night before a big presentation, so that, if the outcome is poor, the obstacle, not your ability, can be blamed. It offers real short-term psychological protection at a steep long-term cost. It caps your results below your real capability, while denying you the accurate feedback that would let you improve. Fear of success is less discussed but real. Some people unconsciously fear that achieving something will create distance from people who haven't achieved similar things, or will demand a pressure to sustain a new, higher standard once it's been demonstrated. Perfectionism is one of the most reliable engines of procrastination, despite being mistaken for a virtue. The implicit rule, the work must meet an extremely high standard, or it isn't worth doing, makes starting feel intolerably risky, since even a rough first attempt now seems to threaten the self-image. The tragic irony is that perfectionism produces the very outcome it fears. Nothing is ever shipped, tested, or improved through real feedback. A useful distinction exists between healthy striving, high standards, reasonable tolerance for falling short, and maladaptive perfectionism, the same standards paired with intolerance for anything less than flawless. A practical fix is deliberately lowering the stakes of early attempts, treating a first draft explicitly as a low-stakes experiment rather than a judgment-worthy final product. Overwhelm causes a different kind of freeze. When a goal is too large or vague to offer an obvious entry point, the mind defaults to avoidance simply because no clear next step presents itself. This responds extremely well to concrete task breakdown, more so than the emotion-driven forms of procrastination above. Mood and energy matter more than most people credit. Sleep deprivation measurably reduces prefrontal cortex function, the brain region responsible for planning and impulse control, making comfort-seeking and distraction significantly harder to resist regardless of motivation. Blood sugar swings, dehydration, and chronic stress have similar effects. None of this is an excuse. It's an operational reality that any serious strategy has to account for. Decision fatigue compounds this further. Every small decision across a day, from what to wear to how to respond to a message, draws on the same limited cognitive resource needed to resist distraction, which is why focus that feels strong in the morning often mysteriously evaporates by evening, even without a single dramatic stressor. Why willpower alone fails. Willpower behaves like a depletable resource, not a fixed trait. Every act of self-control across a day draws from the same limited pool, which is why so many people are disciplined in the morning and unable to resist distraction by 9 p.m. Not a contradiction in character, but a predictable depletion curve. Any strategy relying primarily on willpower is fighting an uphill battle against a finite resource, especially in an environment engineered to drain it constantly. The strategies that actually work share a common feature. They reduce how much willpower is required in the first place. What actually works? Environmental design is the single highest leverage intervention, structuring your physical and digital environment so the desired behavior is the path of least resistance, and the undesired behavior requires active effort to access. This means removing distracting apps from your home screen, using blockers during work blocks, preparing your workspace the night before, and keeping your phone out of arm's reach during focus sessions. Research shows its mere visibility on a desk measurably reduces cognitive performance. The principle throughout: don't rely on resisting temptation in the moment. Design the environment in advance when willpower and judgment are highest. The 2-minute rule targets activation energy, the disproportionate resistance that exists specifically at the start of a task. Committing to just 2 minutes, not to finishing, is small enough that almost no fear or resistance can mount a credible objection, and in most cases, once started, continuing becomes far easier than the initial resistance suggested. Task decomposition solves overwhelm-driven procrastination directly, breaking a vague goal into a sequence of small, completely unambiguous next actions, specific enough that no further thinking is required to begin. Work on the business plan triggers the same overwhelm that caused the avoidance. Write 3 bullet points describing the core problem doesn't. Implementation intentions specific if, then plans like, if it's 7 a.m., I put on my running shoes. Shift the burden of decision-making from the difficult moment of action, when willpower is often depleted, to an earlier moment of calm planning. Working with the emotion rather than around it is the deepest long-term fix. Rather than waiting to feel ready, you practice acting while still feeling anxious or bored, deliberately separating action from feeling. Each time you tolerate the discomfort of starting instead of escaping into distraction, you give your nervous system new evidence that the discomfort is survivable and peaks early. A simple version: pause 10 seconds and name the feeling present. This is anxiety. Research on affect labeling shows this measurably reduces activity in the brain's threat response regions. Numbing a feeling doesn't just create psychological distance, it shifts the underlying neurological state. Rebuilding your relationship with failure matters because fear of failure drives so much avoidance. Failure isn't a verdict on your worth. It's specific, useful information about an approach that didn't work under particular conditions. Framing early attempts explicitly as experiments, not final products, substantially lowers the psychological stakes of starting. Energy management is non-negotiable, not optional. Protecting sleep, identifying your personal window of highest focus, and protecting it for the hardest tasks, regular movement and stable blood sugar, all support the physiological foundation every other tool in this guide depends on. Accountability and social structure leverage a real psychological tendency to remain consistent with commitments made to others. Working alongside someone else, even virtually, makes distraction feel more conspicuous and less automatic, though harsh or judgmental accountability partners tend to increase shame and avoidance rather than reduce it. So the goal is genuine support, not surveillance. Digital environment design deserves its own attention. Auditing notifications ruthlessly, batching email and messages into specific windows rather than checking reactively, and where moderate measures aren't enough, more structural steps like a separate device for deep work hours or grayscale display settings, which research suggests reduces compulsive checking. Anchoring effort in genuinely meaningful goals matters too. Self-determination theory identifies autonomy, competence, and relatedness as the core needs that produce durable intrinsic motivation. Tasks adopted purely from external pressure or comparison tend to generate a deeper, more persistent resistance that no tactical optimization fully resolves. Identity-level change is the deepest and most durable layer. Beliefs not anchored in identity are fragile and easily abandoned under pressure. Someone who identifies as someone who follows through sustains the behavior even when motivation dips, because it's become an expression of who they are, not a means to an end. This identity is built the same way any identity is, through accumulated evidence. Starting with small, genuinely achievable commitments, and consciously acknowledging when you keep them, builds the track record that makes the new identity real. The habit loop framework is useful for understanding any of these patterns: a cue, an uncomfortable internal state; a routine, the escape behavior; and a reward, relief. The cue and reward are rarely the actual problem, they're just features of being human. The routine is the only piece that's changeable, which is why finding a replacement routine that responds to the same cue and provides a similar reward, but with better downstream consequences, tends to work far better than trying to eliminate the loop entirely. Time blocking protects deep work from being crowded out by an endless stream of legitimate but lower-value shallow work. A calendar block with a named purpose creates visible friction against drifting into something easier. An empty afternoon with a mental list offers no resistance at all. Treating commitments to yourself with the same seriousness as commitments to others, not casually rescheduling a protected work block the way you'd never cancel a meeting with your boss, is itself a significant lever. Applying it to real situations. The entrepreneur who can't start the hard part often shows tremendous energy on enjoyable, low-stakes parts of a project: planning, branding, paired with chronic avoidance of vulnerable ones: outreach, pricing, asking for the sale, usually driven by fear that direct market engagement will produce undeniable evidence about whether the idea actually works. Task decomposition and the 2-minute rule help, but numbing the underlying fear explicitly often unlocks more than any scheduling technique alone. The professional who drowns in shallow work isn't engaging in classic procrastination. It's a structural failure to protect space for important but not urgent work in a day legitimately full of urgent but lesser demands. The fix is structural: aggressive time blocking and an honest audit of which urgent demands are genuinely urgent versus simply habitual. The person who procrastinates on rest itself is a less obvious but increasingly common pattern, especially among high achievers. A belief that relaxing is only acceptable once everything is done, a condition that never actually arrives. Sustained without genuine recovery, this eventually forces some form of escape anyway, often less satisfying than real rest would have been. The fix runs counter to most advice here, deliberately scheduling and protecting genuine rest with the same seriousness as productive work. The learner facing a long, undefined goal struggles because nearly every structural protection against procrastination that exists in school or a job with deadlines is absent. The fix is to artificially recreate that structure. Calendared milestones with real consequences, a study group, a coach, or a public commitment to a timeline. Reframing time itself. Underlying much of this struggle is the quiet assumption that there will be more time later, more energy, more clarity, a better moment to begin in earnest. This is, for most practical purposes, false. The conditions that feel necessary for starting rarely arrive as a stable state. They usually arrive as a consequence of having already started. Waiting for them is, in practice, indistinguishable from indefinite postponement. Discipline versus self-punishment. Genuine discipline looks different from the harsh self-punishment many people mistake for it. Self-criticism after a setback reliably predicts more avoidance, not less, because the discomfort of self-judgment becomes one more thing to escape from, often through the very behaviors that cause the lapse. Real discipline is built on clear standards held with warmth. This matters to me, and I'll keep showing up, including on the days I fall short, without treating the shortfall as a verdict on character. When professional support is warranted. For some people, these patterns connect to underlying conditions, ADHD, depression, anxiety, that benefit significantly from clinical support. If the patterns are severe, long-standing, or accompanied by persistent low mood or major attentional difficulty present since childhood, it's worth consulting a professional rather than assuming the issue is purely about willpower or technique. Closing. These patterns are not evidence of weakness. They're predictable features of a normal nervous system operating in an environment built, in many respects, to exploit exactly those features. The success they delay is never lost in one dramatic moment. It's lost in thousands of small, unremarkable instances. But the same mechanism that produces the cost also produces the solution. Small, consistent, well-designed effort compound just as reliably as drift does. None of this requires perfect execution. Protecting one daily block of focused time, using the 2-minute rule, decomposing overwhelming goals into small next actions, and returning quickly and without shame after the inevitable lapses will, over a year, produce a measurably different outcome than relying on willpower and hopping discipline eventually arrives. Much of the suffering in this whole pattern comes not from lost time itself, but from the ongoing self-judgment that accompanies it. Releasing that shame is not a side benefit of this work. For many people, it's the most important part of it. You don't need a single dramatic transformation. You need the next 2 minutes and then the 2 minutes after that until small, consistent action becomes its own momentum. The quiet, compounding foundation the success you've been delaying finally gets built on. Begin now with whatever the smallest next action is. That is enough. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act but a habit, often attributed to Aristotle.